New York Times, and I actually think this report is more credible because it's not two people in a room, but multiple sources. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but there's a couple interesting gems in here. And the New York Times wrote about basically that the Warren-Bernie scandal here, or faux scandal, didn't happen overnight, but it was basically building for months and months and months. So I really found this part the most interesting, and I think it says a lot about Elizabeth Warren, actually. Many Warren advisors and allies think the Sanders camp has long tolerated public attacks on her from his surrogates and believe he is not reining in divisive and in some cases sexist attacks against her among Sanders supporters on Twitter. And the Sanders camp is even more frustrated over what they see as an orchestrated, days-long campaign by Miss Warren to revive her bid by suggesting Sanders is a misogynist. I find this so striking because, first of all, and again, Warren's campaign is littered with former Hillary Clinton campaign people and former Obama people. So let me get this straight. Warren's campaign is upset because some of Bernie Sanders' campaign advisors have quote-unquote attacked her on Twitter by just pointing out that she voted for Donald Trump's defense budget, by pointing out that she's not actually for Medicare for all. This, I have not ever seen Bernie Sanders' campaign once mention Elizabeth Warren and her Native American stuff, the DNA test, you know, questionable things about her life in academia. This is triggering you, and this is an attack? If this is upsetting Elizabeth Warren and her campaign so much, how in the world, and I'm not saying this because she's a woman, I'm just saying this because reality, how in the world are you going to beat Donald Trump if you're such a snowflake about Bernie Sanders' campaign pointing out your record? This is the same nonsense that we experienced with Hillary Clinton in 2016. That, oh, these personal attacks about that you've taken more money than anyone from Wall Street? That's a personal attack? Personal attacks that you've been for every war known to man? Personal attacks that you yourself have called Henry Kissinger a close friend? Talking about your record is sexist? I mean, it's... And by the way, I would say the same thing if this was Julian Castro saying it or Pete Buttigieg saying it, and stop attacking me. Grow a spine. Donald Trump is going to make this look like chump change. And you're sitting here upset over it? It's unbelievable. But that wasn't the only striking thing in this piece. And it was actually a good story by the New York Times. Very informative. Miss Warren and her top advisors believed that Sanders might not run for president, according to people familiar with the discussions at the time, and that there was at least a chance that the 77-year-old Vermont senator would accept political emirati status. Thank you, my love. Master's degree. And crown Miss Warren as the new leader of the left. Are you out of your mind, Elizabeth Warren? This is what I'm talking about. The political instincts of Elizabeth Warren are just so terrible that not only am I worried about her beating Donald Trump because her instincts are bad, but I just want to read this one more time because I think it's so arrogant and out of touch of Elizabeth Warren's campaign. Miss Warren and her top advisors believed that Sanders might not run for president and that there was at least a chance that Bernie would just step aside and essentially, take his role as the elder statesman of the progressive movement and crown her the new leader. Yeah, let me just step aside from the movement I created because you didn't have the courage to run yourself. Let me just step aside when I just saw that you already have made deals with the establishment Democrats because you made a deal with Hillary Clinton's campaign, and that's why you didn't endorse me in the first place. Let me just step aside and bend the knee if you're a Game of Thrones aficionado. I'll bend the knee and just crown, basically, the woman text messaging and having phone calls with Hillary Clinton the person going around having hot tea with the who's who of the Democratic Party establishment, the person voting for Donald Trump's military budget, the person that does not have a record of supporting single-payer health care, by the way. She thought, and they expected, because Bernie Sanders could have very well came out after Elizabeth Warren shanked him in the front and said, well, Warren was trying to talk me out of running. I'm assuming if that's what Warren expected was for Bernie to step aside for her. I don't know if she explicitly said, don't run, but do you really want to do this? Again, bottom line, I think Elizabeth Warren's political instincts are equal, if not worse, to Hillary Clinton's, to tell you the truth. I think Hillary Clinton, I don't think she is good on policy, but I think if her instincts were, in 2016, forget the pollsters, forget the consultants telling me what to say, forget it all. I'm going to go back to that New Hampshire moment in 2008. I'm just going to be real for 5 minutes. I'm going to cry. I'm going to say this is really hard. And if she would have just been raw, I mean, I'm not a fan of her, but I would say the best speech she gave in 2016 was her concession speech. It wasn't scripted, and it showed she actually has a heart and actually feels things rather than just being a poll-tested, consultant-written robot. She would have won. If she would have dared to criticize Obama and some of the neoliberal policies. You know what? If Hillary Clinton in 2016 would have said, honestly, I have seen the old way of politics because I have been complicit in the system, and we need to move in other directions where money is not part of the political system, and that's why I am not accepting a super PAC. I don't want a super PAC. That's why I am not accepting money from lobbyists. If she would have just said, I've been complicit in this, but we need to move in a different direction, people don't trust Washington, she would have won. I don't know if she would have meant it, but she certainly would have won. But she was running on, she was basically running on what Joe Biden is saying now, a return to normalcy. Or in that case, don't let Trump, he's the Antichrist, don't let him in the door. But Elizabeth Warren expected Bernie Sanders, maybe expected is too strong, but, assume that he might step aside for her. I don't know. If I see someone, if I deeply care about these issues, if I'm Bernie, and I see someone that just doesn't seem to have a spine, doesn't seem to have a core conviction about much, because Bernie's smart. He knows that Warren was basically negotiating with Hillary Clinton's campaign as early as 2015. He knows. He knows why she didn't say anything about Standing Rock. He knows. She is a very calculating politician. You think Bernie at 70, then 77, now 78, you think Bernie Sanders was jonesing to go around the country again? Work 20-hour days, 7 days a week? You think he wanted to do that if he thought Elizabeth Warren was the progressive candidate who could beat Donald Trump? Or that she would stick to her progressive guns if elected president? But there's another thing that I found really, really off-putting in this piece. And of course, no one's covering it. Read this part. In 2012, it was Sanders' turn to cross the state line and stump for Warren, Senate bid in Massachusetts. They never became personally close, but their shared worldview brought them together in a Senate light on populists. When it became clear after 2016 that both harbored presidential ambitions, Warren was particularly careful to cultivate Sanders, meaning to woo Sanders, because she was already planning after 2016 to run. She endorsed Keith Ellison, a top Sanders surrogate who was then a congressman, for DNC chair, telling an advisor that she felt she owed it to Sanders, according to a Democrat familiar with the conversation. And before long, she was appearing on Sanders' podcast, and anecdotes were springing up in articles about how they shared meals in airports. Let me get this straight. Your choices for DNC chair were Mayor CIA, I mean Pete Buttigieg, who was, at that point was already trying to leave South Bend. He was running for DNC chair. Your choices for DNC chair. A no-name mayor from South Bend who is obviously basically was created out of a lab somewhere for neoliberal robots and servants to the oligarchy. The other choice is Tom Perez. I don't need to say anything else. We all know Tom Perez. And Keith Ellison, first Muslim congressman, strong progressive, endorsed Bernie Sanders. I think he's now Attorney General of Minnesota, excuse me. You endorse Keith Ellison essentially as a favor to Bernie Sanders? What? By the way, I don't want to get into the minutia. I think Nomiki, who was my colleague at the Young Turks, did a good job back then. That was very questionable, that race, and how they counted the votes for DNC chair. It was very close between Ellison and Tom Perez. And imagine if Keith Ellison was the DNC chair now. You think he would be giving 4 or 5 debates to CNN when they're up with this ridiculousness? So you got Warren after basically leaving Bernie Sanders standing at the altar in 2016. We read the reports. Bernie was literally at an airport hangar on the phone, essentially having to beg an ally to endorse him. And she, honestly, I think it's worse that she chose not to endorse in the primary. I personally would have respected her more if she endorsed Hillary. I would have been pissed off, but at least have a spine. But then this progressive endorses Keith Ellison, not because, like, it's obvious that's the progressive choice for DNC chair, but as a favor to Bernie because you're trying basically already. And by the way, it also shows immediately after 2016, she obviously made the decision, I got to set the road here. I got to start laying the bricks to run in 2020, which means, again, she didn't have the courage of her convictions to run in 2016. And by the way, I'm not even criticizing her for that. It's not necessarily the easiest decision to run for president. She had only been in the Senate for 3 years at that point. I don't think it disqualifies her. It doesn't make her a complete coward to not run in 2016, but it does make you a coward that you, I mean, literally Elizabeth Warren entered her political career slamming Hillary Clinton for switching on the bankruptcy bill. Hillary Clinton, as first lady, was against the bankruptcy bill. Then she becomes a senator. She takes gobbles and gobbles of money from Wall Street. All of a sudden, she's for the bankruptcy bill. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.